Ghana, 1979. The air was thick with betrayal. The smell of revolution lingered in Accra's early morning fog. A once promising post-independence nation had crumbled under the weight of corruption, inflation, and a haunting emptiness that echoed from market stalls to military barracks. 2 decades after independence, Ghanaians were tired. Tired of rationed bread, tired of long fuel queues, tired of governments that came promising gold but delivered only dust. And within this fatigue, a quiet rage brewed, one that would soon erupt in gunfire at the very heart of the state. It began not with a tank, but with a pilot, a 32-year-old flight lieutenant named Jerry Rawlings. Charismatic, stern, unapologetically radical. He was no general, no political elite, but his vision was fire, to cleanse Ghana with truth, blood, and justice. On May 15th, 1979, Rawlings and a handful of junior officers attempted a coup. It failed. He was arrested, court-martialed. His face, defiant, became the face of a new kind of Ghanaian resistance. But the story didn't end in prison. June 4th, 1979. At dawn, the barracks roared again. This time, it worked. Young soldiers, inspired by Rawlings' fiery speeches and disgusted by the senior officers' opulence, stormed the corridors of power. The military government of General Fred Akuffo collapsed. Rawlings was freed from prison and swept into power like a messiah with a rifle. What followed next would etch 1979 into Ghana's soul forever. Rawlings formed the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, AFRC, a band of soldiers determined to purge Ghana of its decayed leadership. They didn't just want reform, they wanted retribution. A people betrayed for too long were now handed the script and the gun. High-ranking military officials were hunted down like ghosts in the day. Men who once ruled Ghana with medals and commands were now stripped, blindfolded, and sentenced. They called it a house cleaning exercise. But to others, it was a public sacrifice. One by one, Ghana's former rulers were lined up against the walls of the Teshi military range. No court of appeal, no last-minute pardons. And as the world watched, stunned, Ghana prepared for its bloodiest morning since independence. The walls of the Burma camp were no longer just stone and concrete. They were witnesses. They saw power change hands. They heard whispered confessions. And on a quiet morning in June 1979, they absorbed the final echoes of fallen rulers, men who once dined in the State House, now kneeling in the dirt. The Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, led by Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings, had made their intentions clear. This was not a time for mercy. This was judgment. The first names released to the press read like a roll call of Ghana's post-independence power. Lieutenant General Afrifa, Ghana's former head of state. General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, the man who overthrew Busia's civilian government in 1972. General Fred Akuffo, the last leader before the Rawlings-led coup. They were not just former presidents, they were symbols. To Rawlings and the FRC, they represented decades of decay, of corruption, of betrayal, of the people's hope. Each of them was taken into military custody. Some were defiant, others begged, but none escaped what was coming. Their trials were swift, not in civil courts, but in revolutionary tribunals. No lawyers, no juries, just a panel of soldiers and young revolutionaries, most younger than the boots these generals had once worn. On June 16th, 1979, just after sunrise, 8 former senior military officials were driven out to the Teshi military shooting range just outside Accra. There were no blindfolds. Ghana would not look away. The message was meant for the masses and for history. A crowd had gathered, partly out of curiosity, partly from anger, and partly from hunger for justice. These were the men many blamed for their starving children, for the fuel scarcity, for the broken promises. And now they would watch power humbled by bullets. As the sun climbed higher, gunfire rang out. One volley, then another. The men fell. Acheampong, Akuffo, Afrifa, and others. The silence that followed was not peace. It was shock. For some Ghanaians, it was a moment of national cleansing. For others, it was a shameful stain, an irreversible descent into political vengeance. International observers condemned the executions. Human rights groups issued statements. Families wept in private. But Rawlings and his soldiers were unmoved. To them, it was necessary. Let the blood flow, they said, if it will water the future. But behind the revolutionary slogans lay a deeper truth. Ghana had killed its kings to warn its princes. And in that warning lay a lesson Africa would revisit again and again in the years to come.